The air in the living room was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Sophie Bennet sat across from her father, her heart pounding as she tried to process what he had just said. "You promised me to him?" Her voice wavered between disbelief and anger. "Tell me you're joking." Jonathan Bennet exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting toward the flickering flames in the fireplace. The warmth of the fire felt like a cruel contrast to the coldness of the moment. "Sophie?" he said, his tone carefully measured. "You know things haven't been easy for us, but Daniel Montoya, he can change everything. He can give you a future." A sharp pressure built in her chest. Daniel Montoya. She had heard his name before. A man of immense wealth, known for his sharp mind and even sharper business tactics. Ruthless, calculating, the kind of man people feared. And now somehow, she was supposed to marry him? "You made this decision without me?" Her voice was tight, controlled, but barely. "Marriage isn't a business transaction, Dad. It's supposed to mean something." Her father's jaw tensed, his eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to regret. "For him, maybe it is. But for you, Sophie, this could be something more. He could give you stability, and maybe if you let him, even love." She let out a sharp breath, forcing down the sting of frustration. "I'm not some pawn to be traded away. I don't want to be someone's perfect little wife." Jonathan reached for her hand, his grip firm but not forceful. "Life doesn't always give us choices, Sophie. Sometimes the path we fight the hardest is the one that leads us where we're meant to be." Her fingers curled into fists in her lap. This wasn't fair. She was being given to a stranger. And yet, buried beneath her frustration, a single question gnawed at her. Why had Daniel Montoya, a man who had everything, agreed to an arranged marriage with someone he had never met? Men like him didn't do anything without a reason. As she stood and left the room, her father's words still echoed in her mind. The decision had been made. There was no way out. But maybe, just maybe, this was more than just a contract. Maybe it was the start of something else entirely. Sophie's hands were ice cold as she sat in the elegant hotel lobby, fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. Her father had been clear. Meet Daniel Montoya. Discuss the wedding arrangements. She had expected to feel anger, maybe even fear. Instead, all she felt was unease, like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite name. Everything about this place screamed power. The marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's soft light. The quiet hum of conversation filled the space, polished and controlled. Even the air smelled expensive. None of it made her feel any less like a trapped bird. Then she saw him. A tall figure stepped into view, moving with a quiet authority that made the room seem smaller. He wasn't just dressed well. His entire presence was calculated, refined, every movement deliberate, every detail precise. But it was his eyes that made her breath hitch. Dark, cold, assessing. Daniel Montoya. He walked toward her with slow, measured steps, his gaze locked onto hers. And in that moment, Sophie realized this was no ordinary man. And this was no ordinary arrangement. A slight shiver ran down Sophie's spine as she rose from her seat, preparing to greet the man standing before her. He extended his hand, his movement deliberate, confident. "Sophie Bennet, I presume." His voice was exactly as she had imagined, deep, composed, carrying a quiet authority that demanded attention. "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. She took his hand, noting the firm strength of his grip. It was controlled, assured, but she let go quickly, resisting the urge to avert her gaze. "Thank you for meeting me," he continued, his tone polite yet distant. "I understand this situation may not be ideal for you." She inhaled slowly, willing herself to meet his gaze with a determination she wasn't entirely sure she felt. "Ideal, Mr. Montoya? That's an understatement." A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed his face. It was barely noticeable, just a hint of a smirk. "Call me Daniel," he said smoothly. "We're about to be family, after all." He gestured toward a quiet corner where 2 chairs awaited, and Sophie reluctantly followed. Once seated, he leaned back slightly, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I realize you may feel trapped in this arrangement," he said, his words measured. "But I assure you, I'm as invested in making this as tolerable as possible for both of us." "Tolerable?" she repeated, a dry edge creeping into her voice. Interesting choice of words. His sharp gaze remained locked on hers, his expression unwavering. "I appreciate honesty," he said simply. It saves time. We both know why we're here, and I have no intention of making promises I can't keep. My priority is preserving my family's legacy, and an alliance with yours serves my interests. His bluntness left her momentarily speechless. She had expected something different, perhaps a man who would try to charm her into submission or manipulate her into feeling indebted. Instead, she was met with stark, unapologetic reality. "And what about me?" she challenged, finding her voice again. "Do you expect me to just go along with this because it benefits our families?" His expression softened, just slightly. "Not at all," he said. "I have no interest in an unhappy marriage or a wife who resents me. But in public, I need a partner. Someone who will help solidify the image I'm building. In return, I'll ensure your needs are met. Financial independence, security, and freedom within reason." Her pulse quickened. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, so willing to lay everything out without pretense. Yet something in his demeanor made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Staring into the unknown, a silence stretched between them. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she said, "I'm willing to agree to that." But she wasn't finished. "I have conditions." Daniel's brow lifted, clearly intrigued. "Go on." "If I'm going to be your wife," she began, her voice stronger now, "I expect respect, not control. I want the freedom to maintain my own life, my own identity, and I want a marriage that has dignity, whatever that may look like." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, after careful consideration, he nodded. "Fair enough, I can accept those terms." For the first time since she had walked into the hotel, Sophie felt the faintest glimmer of hope. It wasn't love. Not yet. But there was something. A foundation. A mutual understanding. And for now, that was enough. Days after their first meeting, Sophie found herself standing in front of the grand estate of Daniel Montoya. The sprawling mansion loomed before her, its towering architecture even more imposing up close. He had arranged for her to visit the estate, the place where she would live after the wedding. Though the idea still felt surreal, she had agreed. A staff member greeted her upon arrival, leading her through opulent hallways lined with priceless artwork and chandeliers that sparkled like captured starlight. But despite the grandeur, the house felt cold. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Like a place built to impress, not to be lived in. As Sophie walked through the grand estate, she couldn't help but wonder, was Daniel Montoya just as distant in his private life as he was in public? A staff member led her through marble corridors, past towering windows and pristine, untouched spaces. Finally, they stopped at a set of doors and gestured for her to enter. Inside, Daniel sat behind a massive oak desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished wood. His gaze was distant, unreadable, but the moment he saw her, he stood, greeting her with a polite nod. "Sophie, I trust the journey here was comfortable?" His voice was smooth, carefully measured, polite, yet impersonal. "Yes," she replied, glancing around the study. "Your home is impressive." "Thank you," he said simply, showing little interest in her admiration. "I wanted you to familiarize yourself with the estate before you decide where you'd be most comfortable. Any part of the house can be adjusted to your preference." Sophie blinked, caught off guard. "You're giving me free rein?" "Within reason, of course." A flicker of amusement crossed his gaze. "We'll be sharing this home. I want you to feel at ease here." She nodded slowly, considering the unexpected gesture. "I appreciate that. It's more than I expected." Daniel stepped out from behind his desk, his movements deliberate, controlled. As he came closer, the air between them seemed to shift. "Sophie," he said, his voice softer than before, "I want you to understand something." She held his gaze, tension curling in her stomach. "This arrangement, unconventional as it is, comes with certain expectations," he continued. "There will be events, gatherings, moments where we must appear as a united front. I won't ask more of you than what's necessary, but I do expect your cooperation." She lifted her chin slightly. "And outside of those obligations, outside of them, I'm simply Daniel." His expression was unreadable. "You are free to live your life as you see fit, within the boundaries of our agreement." His words settled over her, leaving her with a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. He was offering her a sense of freedom, yet beneath his carefully measured tone, she sensed something else. Control. She wanted to ask why he had agreed to this marriage in the first place, but part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Instead, she drew in a breath and met his gaze with quiet resolve. "Then I suppose we have an understanding," she said. "As long as you respect my independence, I'll respect our agreement." For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say more, but instead he nodded. "Good, we'll arrange for the ceremony soon. For now, I'll have the staff show you to the guest suite so you can rest." Sophie turned to leave, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit, but just as she reached the doorway, his voice stopped her. "One last thing, Sophie." She looked back, meeting his steady gaze. "If at any point this arrangement becomes too much for you, I hope you'll tell me. I'd rather know the truth than maintain a lie, even one of convenience." Her breath caught. There was something layered in his words, an unexpected sincerity she hadn't anticipated. For a brief moment, she saw something beneath the composed exterior. A glimpse of a man who wasn't just ruthless calculation, but someone with vulnerabilities of his own. "I will," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "and I expect the same from you." He held her gaze for a long second. Then, he gave a single nod. With that, she turned and walked away, feeling the weight of his stare lingering on her back. Their marriage might have been arranged, but there was something between them. An unspoken tension that left her wondering, would this remain a mere contract, or was it already becoming something more? Days turned into weeks, and soon, Sophie found herself swept up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations. Daniel had insisted on hosting an engagement gala to formally announce their upcoming marriage. And from what she had heard, it was set to be the event of the season. The engagement gala was as much about Daniel Montoya's public image as it was about their impending marriage. Sophie knew that. And yet, as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the sleek, elegant gown that hugged her frame, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into someone else's life. Diamond earrings shimmered under the light, paired with a delicate necklace that had arrived earlier that day. A gift from Daniel. The look was stunning, but Sophie still felt like a carefully placed piece in a game she hadn't chosen to play. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, and there he was. Dressed in a sharp black tuxedo that fit his broad frame with effortless precision, Daniel exuded his usual controlled confidence. But for a brief moment, something in his expression shifted as he took her in. His gaze softened, just slightly. "You look perfect," he said, his voice carrying a rare warmth. Sophie's breath hitched. "Thank you," she murmured, barely above a whisper. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, like he was seeing something beyond the carefully chosen jewelry, beyond the dress. Daniel extended his arm. "Shall we?" She hesitated only for a moment before placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. Beneath the fabric of his suit, she could feel the strength in his posture, steady, unwavering. Together, they descended the grand staircase toward the ballroom. The moment they entered, a wave of applause rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned toward them. Sophie felt the weight of their gazes, the murmurs, the quiet assessment of those who thrived on appearances. But Daniel's presence beside her was grounding. His grip on her hand firm yet reassuring. They moved through the room seamlessly, exchanging pleasantries and accepting congratulations. She watched him navigate each conversation with effortless charm, his words precise, his demeanor unreadable. There was a quiet authority to him, one that commanded both respect and, she suspected, a touch of fear. Then, an older woman, dressed in elegant silk and adorned with glittering jewels, approached with a knowing smile. "So you're the young woman who has managed to capture Daniel's heart," she mused, her tone polite but laced with curiosity. "Tell me, my dear, how did you two meet?" Sophie hesitated. She felt Daniel's gaze on her, a silent reassurance. Then, he spoke before she could find the right words. "It was a meeting arranged by fate," he said smoothly, his eyes never leaving hers. "We were both looking for stability, something solid. I found that in Sophie." His tone was composed, meant for the crowd. And yet, something about the way he said it, something about the way he looked at her, made her chest tighten. It almost felt like he believed it. The night continued in a blur of conversation and carefully curated interactions. Daniel never left her side. His hand guided her through the crowd, his touch light but certain. Their movements were synchronized, a well-rehearsed performance that felt too effortless. And yet, beneath the polished smiles and the staged perfection, Sophie couldn't deny it. Something was shifting. An unspoken connection, fragile but undeniable. Later that evening, they finally stepped away from the crowd, seeking a rare moment of reprieve. The cool night air wrapped around them as they stood on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. For the first time that evening, the music and chatter faded into the background. Daniel turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. "You handled everything exceptionally well." Sophie looked up at him, her heart beating a little too fast. "I never expected to feel comfortable in all of this," she admitted. "But with you, it was easier." His gaze held hers, steady and unguarded. For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. There was something unspoken in his eyes, a hint of vulnerability, a glimpse of the man behind the carefully constructed image. Did he feel it too? The tension that had been building between them since the beginning? He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "I know. This isn't the life you would have chosen," Daniel said, his voice quiet but certain, "but I promise I'll do everything I can to make it a life you want to stay in." Something shifted inside Sophie at his words. For the first time since this arrangement began, the resentment she had clung to so tightly began to unravel, replaced by something far more dangerous: hope. She still didn't know what the future held. But maybe, just maybe, this marriage could be more than a contract. The engagement gala marked a turning point between them. In the days that followed, Sophie found herself swept into a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Her life was changing at a relentless pace, moving her things into Daniel's estate, adjusting to a world that wasn't hers but would soon become her reality. The sprawling mansion no longer felt foreign, and yet, no matter how much she tried to settle in, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a role she hadn't been meant for. One evening, after a long day of meetings and decisions, Sophie retreated to her suite, desperate for a moment to breathe. Her suite was connected to Daniel's, separated by a set of double doors that remained closed more often than not. It was an unspoken boundary between them. But tonight, as she stepped inside, she found him waiting in the adjoining room. His posture was relaxed, his gaze steady as he watched her enter. "You've had a long day," he noted, his voice even. "I wanted to see if you're settling in." She paused, surprised by the question. Daniel Montoya rarely indulged in small talk. Yet here he was, looking almost at ease in a way she had never seen before. "Yes," she admitted slowly. "It's strange. Everything here is so perfect. And yet, it feels like I'm borrowing someone else's life." Daniel regarded her for a moment, then said, "It may seem that way now. But this place is as much yours as it is mine. You don't need to change who you are to belong here." The sincerity in his voice made her pulse quicken. He wasn't offering declarations of love or grand romantic promises, but there was truth in his words, a small comfort, a quiet anchor, and for some reason, she found herself wanting to know more. "Daniel," she said hesitantly, "why did you agree to this arrangement?" His expression shifted slightly, the carefully composed mask slipping just enough for her to see something real beneath it. "You don't seem like the kind of man who would need an arranged marriage." For a moment, he was silent. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "I've spent most of my life alone," he admitted, his voice quieter now, as if he were revealing something long guarded. "I thought that was what I wanted: control, independence." His gaze flickered, something unreadable passing through his expression. "But over time, I realized that wealth and power come with their own kind of loneliness." Sophie's breath caught. There was vulnerability in his words, a rare glimpse into the man behind the name, the man the world never got to see. And suddenly she realized she was beginning to understand him. Daniel took a step closer, his presence steady, unwavering. "This arrangement may have started as a formality," he said, his gaze locked on hers, "but I see now that it could be something more, a partnership." Sophie swallowed, unsure whether to feel hopeful or cautious. "A partnership," she echoed. "Yes." His voice was softer now. He reached for her hand, his touch warm, certain. "I have no illusions about romance," he admitted. "But respect, honesty, that is something I can promise you, and in time, Perhaps something deeper can grow between us." Her heart fluttered at his words, but she kept her voice steady. "And what if I want more than respect and honesty, Daniel?" she asked quietly. "What if I want something real, a connection?" He studied her, his gaze searching hers as if trying to read the parts of her she had yet to reveal. Then, after a moment, he said, "Then I would ask you to give me a chance." His grip tightened around her fingers, a silent promise. "Let me prove that I can be more than the man you see now." Sophie hesitated, only for a second. Then slowly she nodded. She hadn't expected to feel anything real in this arrangement, yet here he was. And despite everything, she wanted to believe him. A complicated man. That's what Daniel Montoya was. A man who kept his emotions guarded, yet in rare moments like this, let Sophie see glimpses of something real. They stood there in silence, the weight of unspoken promises lingering between them. And for the first time since this arrangement had begun, Sophie felt her doubts beginning to soften. As she looked up at him, she realized something. Beneath the controlled exterior, beneath the cold precision of his world, Daniel was just as vulnerable as she was. Both of them were navigating a future they hadn't chosen. "Then let's take it one day at a time," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now, a partnership sounds like a good start." A small, fleeting smile touched his lips, the closest thing to genuine she had ever seen from him. "One day at a time," he agreed, his hand lingering on hers for just a second longer. And in that moment, Sophie felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe this marriage would surprise her after all. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Sophie and Daniel settled into a rhythm, one that, to her surprise, felt natural. They shared breakfasts in the sunlit dining room, their conversations once polite, but now carrying a quiet warmth. She learned that Daniel was a man of routine, steady, composed, but surprisingly open to small changes. Little by little, the distance between them began to fade. One evening, as Sophie wandered into the library, she found Daniel seated in a deep armchair by the fireplace, a book resting in his hands. The flickering firelight softened his sharp features, casting shadows along his jawline. For a moment, she hesitated, not wanting to intrude. But Daniel glanced up, and with an almost imperceptible nod, gestured for her to join him. "You're welcome to sit, if you'd like," he said, his tone uncharacteristically inviting. She nodded and sank into the chair opposite him. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with an unspoken understanding. After a moment, she tilted her head, curiosity getting the better of her. "What are you reading?" He held up the cover, a well-worn copy of a classic novel. She blinked. Pride and Prejudice. Of all the books she could have imagined in his hands, this was not one of them. She let out a surprised laugh. "You're reading that?" Daniel chuckled, a deep, warm sound that softened his usually guarded demeanor. "I may have a preference for business reports," he admitted, "but even I need a break sometimes. I wanted to see what draws people to these kinds of stories." Sophie smirked. "Are you trying to learn about romance, Daniel?" A faint blush crept along the edge of his collar. So subtle she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching closely. "Perhaps I am," he admitted. His eyes met hers, holding a newfound openness that made her breath catch. "I realized recently," he continued, "that there's more to life than I've allowed myself to experience." Silence settled between them, his words lingering in the air. Sophie studied him, a mix of empathy and curiosity swirling inside her. She had spent so much time trying to figure him out, trying to decipher the enigma that was Daniel Montoya. And now, in this rare moment, he was offering her a piece of himself. "Daniel," she said gently, "have you ever been in love?" He looked away, his gaze distant as he considered her question. "No." His voice was quiet, honest. "I think I was too focused on control, on building a life I could manage," he admitted. "Love is unpredictable, messy. I avoided it because it didn't fit into my plans." Sophie's chest tightened. She saw it now. The walls he had built around himself, so carefully constructed that even he hadn't realized how much they had isolated him. For all his wealth, for all his power, he had never allowed himself the simple, chaotic, beautiful experience of truly connecting with someone, and she felt something ache for him. "You know," she said softly, "love may be unpredictable, but it's also what makes life beautiful." She motioned toward the book in his hands. "It's why people read stories like this one, to feel something real, to connect in a way that goes beyond logic or control. Daniel said nothing, but the way he looked at her in that moment, like he was seeing something he hadn't understood before, made Sophie wonder. Maybe he wasn't just learning about romance. Maybe, without realizing it, he was living it. Daniel watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. His voice was quieter when he finally spoke. "And do you believe we could have that, Sophie? In this marriage of ours?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't let herself hope for something so real. Not yet. But here he was, looking at her with an intensity that hinted at his own longing, his own uncertainty. She drew in a slow breath, holding his gaze. "I think, if we're both willing to try, then maybe we could," she said, her voice steady. "But it won't happen overnight. Love isn't something you can control or predict, Daniel. It's something you grow, little by little." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. For the first time, she felt that he understood. That whatever was between them wouldn't be built on an agreement or the polite promise of respect. It would take something more. Vulnerability. Trust. The willingness to let go of the need for control. They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly between them, neither needing to fill the space with words. And in that quiet moment, Sophie felt the shift between them, a step toward something undefined, but something real. As the evening stretched on, their conversation drifted. They talked about everything and nothing, about childhood memories, old family traditions, favorite books, dreams neither of them had shared with anyone before. They laughed, shared stories, and for the first time, Sophie saw Daniel fully, not just as the businessman, not just as the man she was bound to by circumstance, but as himself. Beneath the carefully polished exterior was someone who, despite his power and wealth, was still just as human as she was, with his own fears, his own desires, his own longing for something more. And when the hour grew late, Daniel walked her to her suite, pausing just outside the doorway. He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a slow, absent motion. The warmth of his touch steadied her in a way she didn't expect. "Thank you for tonight," he murmured, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I haven't felt this close to someone in a long time." Her chest tightened. "Neither have I," she admitted, her gaze unwavering. "But I think we're starting to understand each other." Something flickered in his expression, something quiet, something real. He nodded, a faint smile ghosting over his lips. "Good night, Sophie." "Good night, Daniel." And as he walked away, she stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that this marriage could become something more. Something built not just on obligation, but on trust. And maybe, just maybe, on love. Days turned into weeks. Though Sophie had adjusted to her life of quiet luxury, the weight of their arrangement still lingered in the back of her mind. Was all of this just an illusion? A dream she had let herself believe in, only for it to shatter. But then there were the moments that made her question everything. Each conversation, each shared glance. Each time Daniel let his guard slip, just for a second, revealing glimpses of a man who was more than the role he had been born into. He had told her once that this marriage had the potential to become something real. But did he mean it? Or was this just another responsibility to him? A way to maintain his family's legacy, to fulfill the expectations of a past he hadn't chosen? The question haunted her as she navigated their new life together. Because the truth was, their dynamic was changing. It was no longer just about appearances, about business meetings and carefully curated public moments. It was about trust. A fragile trust, still being built. One day at a time. One evening, Sophie sat on the balcony of their estate, watching the sun slip beneath the horizon. She had expected to be alone, but then Daniel appeared, stepping outside with his usual quiet grace. For once, he wasn't buried in work, and yet something about him seemed different. He was quieter tonight, more distant. His usual composure had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. Sophie studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice gentle but direct. "You've been distant lately." Daniel exhaled, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. He didn't answer immediately, as if he was searching for the right words. Then, finally, he spoke. I've been struggling with something," Daniel admitted, his voice low, almost reluctant. Sophie turned to him, immediately sensing the tension in his posture. "There's been a breach in my company," he continued. A security issue. Someone close to me has been leaking information. He exhaled, his jaw tightening, and I don't know who to trust. Sophie's heart clenched. She had always known Daniel as a man who thrived on control, who built his world with precision, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. But now she saw something else. He looked unsteady. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something almost fragile. For the first time, she saw the cracks in the armor he wore so well. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her hand moving instinctively toward his. "I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you." Daniel met her gaze. His eyes, usually sharp, always calculating, were clouded with exhaustion. "I've spent my entire life building something secure," he admitted, "something that could withstand any storm. But this?" He shook his head. "This feels like a betrayal." Sophie squeezed his hand gently. "Trust is everything, isn't it?" He nodded, his thumb absent-mindedly brushing against her fingers. "It is," he murmured, "and right now, I don't know who I can trust anymore." The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Sophie had never seen him like this before. He had always been so in control, so composed. But now? Now he was just a man, one who had been blindsided, who wasn't sure how to move forward. "Daniel," she said softly, steadying her voice, "I know we're still figuring out this marriage, but I need you to know you can trust me." His gaze flickered. "No matter what happens, I'll be here," she continued. "I may not be able to fix everything, but I'll stand by your side." Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable, something raw. "You don't understand," he murmured, almost to himself. "This isn't just about work or betrayal." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "It's about losing control." His voice was almost a whisper, "Losing the one thing I've always relied on." Sophie leaned in, her heart reaching for him in a way she hadn't expected. "Then let me help you," she said quietly. "Not to fix it, not to take over." Her fingers curled around his, grounding him. "But to be here, to be the one person you don't have to control." For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak, and Sophie wondered if she had said the wrong thing. Then, to her surprise, he pulled her closer. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, his head resting against hers. The gesture was quiet, but it was full of meaning. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with something unspoken. "I don't know how to let people in, how to trust them." A pause. "But with you, it feels different." Sophie closed her eyes, her heart swelling in her chest. For the first time, she felt like they weren't just two strangers bound by an arrangement. They were two people, two souls, fragile in their own ways, trying to make sense of a world that had always demanded control. The night stretched on, stars twinkling overhead in silent witness to whatever was growing between them. They didn't need words. They didn't need to define it. For now, being in each other's arms was enough. Sophie had expected silence. For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak, and she wondered if she had overstepped, if she had pushed too far, too soon. But then, to her surprise, he pulled her closer. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, his head resting lightly against hers. The gesture was simple, but it meant everything. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with something unspoken. "I don't know how to let people in, how to trust them." A pause. "But with you, it feels different." Sophie closed her eyes, her heart tightening in her chest as she melted into the warmth of him. For the first time since their marriage, it felt like they weren't just two people bound by an agreement. They were two souls, fragile in their own ways, trying to make sense of a world that had never truly been theirs to control. The night deepened around them, stars flickering in the sky above, silent witnesses to whatever was forming between them. They didn't need words. They didn't need to define it. For now, simply being in each other's arms was enough. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of routine and quiet revelations. Daniel remained consumed by his work, but Sophie saw a shift in him. There was a softness now, an openness that hadn't been there before. Though he was still reserved in public, in private, there was an intimacy growing between them, a quiet understanding that deepened with each passing day. But with that intimacy came something else, a realization. Sophie was opening up to him. She was learning to trust him. Yet there were still parts of him he kept locked away. Parts of his life he wasn't ready to share with her. She didn't press him. She knew trust wasn't something that could be forced. But sometimes the distance between them felt impossibly vast, like invisible walls stood between them, just waiting to be torn down. One evening, after a formal dinner with business associates, Sophie and Daniel walked through the dimly lit hallway leading to their private quarters. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence, thick with unspoken thoughts. Daniel looked exhausted. She could see it in the slight hunch of his shoulders, in the weariness beneath the carefully polished surface. He had been under relentless pressure, carrying the weight of his responsibilities without complaint. But she saw it, and she felt it. "Daniel," she said softly, breaking the silence. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "You need to take a break," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "You're running yourself into the ground." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "I'm fine, Sophie," he said, brushing it off. "You don't need to worry about me." But she wasn't convinced. "I'm not just worrying," she said, reaching for his hand. "You're pushing yourself too hard, and it's not just about work, is it? There's something more." For a moment he hesitated. Then his gaze darkened, his eyes flickering away as if debating whether to say what he was really thinking. Sophie waited. She didn't push, she just waited. Finally he let out a slow, measured breath. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I can do this." Her chest tightened. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual control slipping for the first time. "Not all of it, not everything," he admitted. "I thought I could handle it, the company, the marriage, the expectations. But lately, I feel like I'm losing control of everything." He exhaled sharply. "There's so much pressure, so many people depending on me." He shook his head. "And I don't know how much longer I can keep up this facade." His words hit her like a wave, because for so long she had only seen one version of Daniel, the powerful, composed billionaire. The man who always had a plan, who never faltered. But now she saw him. A man under immense pressure. A man terrified of losing everything he had worked so hard for. Sophie stepped closer, taking his hand in both of hers. "Daniel," she said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." His fingers tightened around hers, as if holding on to something solid. "I don't expect perfection," she continued. "I just expect you." "I don't need anything from you, Daniel," Sophie said softly. "I just want to be there for you. You don't have to carry this alone." For a long moment, he didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on their joined hands, as if trying to process the weight of her words. Then, slowly, he looked up at her. His gaze searched hers, as though trying to determine if she truly meant what she was saying, if she meant to stay. "I don't know how to let anyone in," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always had to rely on myself. I've always kept everything locked inside because that's the only way I know how to survive. Letting someone in." He exhaled sharply. "It feels like a risk, like I'm exposing myself in ways I can't control." Sophie's chest tightened. She had always known that Daniel was a man who trusted few. But hearing him admit it, hearing the quiet vulnerability behind his words, that was something else entirely. She could feel his internal war, the pull toward connection, but the fear of what it might cost him. "You don't have to let everything go all at once," she murmured, her voice gentle. "Just let me in, little by little." He stayed quiet, listening. "You don't have to expose everything," she continued, "but trust me with the parts you're ready to share. I can't fix everything, but I can listen, and I can be here, no matter what." A long silence stretched between them. Sophie watched as Daniel slowly absorbed her words. Then finally he gave a small nod. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease just slightly. "I don't deserve your kindness, Sophie." His voice was rough, hesitant. "You're too good for me." She reached up, gently tilting his chin until his gaze met hers. "You don't have to deserve it," she whispered. "You're human, just like I am. You're not perfect. Neither am I." A pause. "But together," she added softly, "we can figure this out." For the first time in a long while, Daniel smiled. It was small, subtle, but it was real. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. A beat of silence. "Maybe," he said, as if testing the words. "Maybe I can learn to trust you." His fingers tightened around hers. "Maybe I can learn to trust myself." Sophie felt warmth bloom in her chest. Hope. She knew this wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges ahead, more walls to break down. But in that moment, she realized that trust wasn't something given all at once. It was something built, step by step. As they walked toward their quarters, hand in hand, The weight on Daniel's shoulders seemed just a little lighter. There was still uncertainty, still battles to be fought. But with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. And for the first time, the idea of a future together felt real. A week had passed since the night Daniel had opened up to her. The tension between them had lessened, but Sophie could still feel something lingering beneath the surface. Something unspoken. She had given him space, not wanting to overwhelm him with her expectations. But a quiet uncertainty remained. One morning she found him in his study, seated behind his massive desk, staring out the window. He didn't notice her at first. His usual sharp focus was gone, his thoughts weighing heavily on him. Sophie stood in the doorway for a moment, debating whether to interrupt. But Daniel had always made her feel seen, even when she had felt invisible. And now she felt the same pull, to reach out, to bridge the quiet distance between them. "Daniel?" Her voice was soft, careful. He turned slightly, offering her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, Sophie." "Good morning," she replied as she stepped closer. "You've been here for hours, haven't you?" He nodded, his gaze drifting back to the window. "There's always something to do," he muttered, but there was something else in his voice. Something deeper. "But it's more than that," Sophie said gently. "There are decisions I need to make," Daniel admitted. His voice was quiet but strained. "Things that are beyond my control." Sophie didn't know what those things were. Not yet, but she could hear it in his voice. This wasn't just about business. It was about everything. Everything he had built. Everything he stood to lose. Daniel carried it all, and Sophie could see the weight of it pressing down on him, even as he tried to pretend it wasn't there. "Daniel," she said softly, stepping closer. "You don't have to carry this burden alone." He turned to her then, his expression shifting, hardening into something sharper, more guarded. "I don't have a choice, Sophie," he snapped, his voice rising with frustration. "I don't have the luxury of sharing my burdens. I'm the one who holds everything together." The sudden outburst caught her off guard. But she didn't step back. She understood now. His need for control wasn't about arrogance. It wasn't about power. It was about fear. The fear of losing everything he had built. And perhaps, even more than that, the fear of losing himself. "You don't have to keep everything inside," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "You have me, Daniel. We're in this together, remember?" He didn't respond right away. His jaw tightened, tension rippling through his frame. She could see the war raging inside him, the instinct to push her away battling against the quiet, desperate part of him that wanted to let her in. Then finally, he pushed back from his desk, standing abruptly. His movements were sharp, restless. "I don't know how to let go of that control," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't know how to trust anyone enough to rely on them." His eyes met hers, and for a split second, Sophie saw it, the truth. "You're the one person I thought I could trust," he murmured. "But even then, I'm not sure I'm ready." Sophie stepped forward, her heart aching for him. "Daniel, I don't expect you to be perfect." She reached for his hand, not to take, not to pull, just to offer. "I just want you to trust me enough to share the weight. You don't have to fix everything on your own. Let me help you. Let me be there in whatever way you need." His eyes softened, but there was still hesitation. She could see it, the deep, ingrained fear that had kept him locked away for so long. Letting someone in wasn't just uncomfortable for him. It was terrifying. "I'm scared." The words barely escaped his lips, as if saying them aloud made them too real. "I'm scared that if I let go, everything will fall apart." Sophie placed a gentle hand on his arm, grounding him. "It's okay to be scared," she said, her voice steady. "But you don't have to do it alone. We're stronger together." Silence stretched between them, fragile and heavy. Finally, Daniel exhaled, a long, unsteady breath. His shoulders sagged just slightly. "You make it sound so simple," he murmured, the corner of his mouth twitching as if caught between a smirk and something more vulnerable. "I wish I could believe it." "You don't have to believe it all at once," Sophie said gently, "just one step at a time." His gaze held hers, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something different in his eyes. A flicker of hope, a flicker of trust. The walls between them hadn't completely crumbled, but they had cracked. And for the first time, Sophie felt like she wasn't just knocking on the door of his heart. He was slowly opening it to her. "I'll try," he whispered, barely audible. Sophie squeezed his hand. I'll be here. Her tone was firm, certain. I won't give up on you. And with those simple words, something shifted between them. It wasn't magic. It wasn't instant. But it was real. Daniel had taken the first step toward opening up, and Sophie had made it clear she would stand beside him no matter what came next. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. Sophie lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind restless. A part of her had hoped that last night, that moment of raw honesty, would be the breakthrough they needed. But as the silence stretched around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. Daniel had been distant since their conversation. His internal battles were still casting long shadows over them. It was as if the more they tried to bridge the gap between them, the wider it became. Sophie had learned to be patient. But patience didn't stop the ache in her chest. And as she got out of bed that morning, she realized she wasn't done fighting for him. Not yet. Sophie had learned to recognize the small signs. The way Daniel's jaw tightened when his thoughts turned inward. The way his eyes grew distant when he thought no one was watching. Even after everything they had shared, he was still holding back. Still unsure of how to let go. Still unsure of how to trust, even her. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, just as Daniel appeared in the doorway. Dressed in his usual tailored suit, his expression unreadable. But beneath the composed exterior, Sophie could sense it. Something was different. "Morning," he said, his voice steady. But there was tension beneath it, something carefully restrained. "Good morning," she replied, sitting up on the edge of the bed. Her eyes searched his face. "How are you?" His gaze flickered for a brief second, betraying a glimpse of emotion before he quickly masked it. "Busy," he answered. "A lot to do, meetings to attend." A pause. Then, "But we need to talk." The air shifted instantly. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. They had avoided deeper conversations since the night everything had unraveled between them. Since the walls had almost come down. But now, there was no avoiding it. She stood, crossing the room until she was standing in front of him. "What about?" Daniel hesitated. Then finally he met her gaze. "Everything." His voice was quiet but firm. "I need you to understand something," he continued, his expression conflicted. "I'm not like other men, Sophie. I don't know how to be what you want me to be, and I don't know if I can change." Sophie's pulse quickened. The raw honesty in his voice unsettled her, but she refused to let fear take hold. This was it. The moment that would either break them apart or push them forward together. "I never asked you to change, Daniel," she said softly. "I don't need you to be anyone else. I just need you to be real with me." A pause. "And maybe," she added gently, "that means letting me see the parts of you that you've kept hidden for so long." His jaw tightened. He turned away slightly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I've been living with this for so long. The fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being weak." His voice grew rougher. "And I thought I could keep it all in check. But now." He exhaled sharply. "I don't know anymore." Sophie stepped closer, hesitating only for a moment before reaching out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "It's okay to be afraid, Daniel," she said softly. "We all have fears." She squeezed his arm gently. "But you don't have to carry them alone anymore. I want to help you. Please, let me in." But Daniel shook his head. The anger in his eyes wasn't directed at her, it was at himself. "You don't get it," he snapped, his voice sharp. "If I let go, I lose everything. My business, my name, my reputation. Everything I've worked for will fall apart." Sophie held his gaze, her voice unwavering. "Is that really what you think?" He froze. "That your worth is tied to all of that?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "To the image you've created?" Daniel's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while she saw the cracks in his armor. And then, almost too softly to hear, he whispered, "What if it's all I have?" Sophie's heart clenched. "Then, I'll be here to help you see that there's more." She took another step forward, her voice steady. "There's more to you than what you've built, Daniel." Her fingers brushed his. "You are more than your empire." A pause. "And you are more than your past mistakes." The silence that followed was heavy, fragile. She could see the war raging inside him. The battle between the man he had become and the man he had always wanted to be. Finally, his voice broke through the stillness, raw and quiet. I don't know if I'm strong enough to let go of all of this. A hesitation. But maybe, he swallowed hard. Maybe I can try. Sophie stepped even closer, her hand gently cupping his face, tilting his chin so his eyes met hers. You don't have to do it perfectly. You don't have to have all the answers. All I'm asking, she whispered, is that you trust me. Daniel inhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a brief moment. A deep sigh escaped his lips, and when he opened his eyes again, something had changed. For the first time, Sophie saw it. A glimmer of something different. A flicker of hope. A crack in the fortress Daniel had so carefully built around his heart. I'll try, he said, his voice low, steady. Sophie's chest tightened, warmth spreading through her. Then that's all I need, she replied gently. I'll be here, every step of the way. Their hands were still clasped together, the weight of everything shifting between them. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be doubt. There would be struggle. But for the first time, they weren't standing on opposite sides of the line. They were facing the future together, uncertain, but hopeful. The days that followed felt like a turning point. Sophie noticed the subtle changes in Daniel, how he no longer recoiled at vulnerability, how his walls, though still present, weren't impenetrable anymore. But just as she had feared, the past never truly let go. He still carried it. The weight of everything he had built, the decisions that had shaped him, and the haunting fear that if he loosened his grip, even for a second, everything would come crashing down. Despite the cracks in his armor, he was still Daniel Montoya. The man who ruled empires, the man whose name commanded respect, and the man who feared losing control more than anything else. But Sophie was determined to show him something else. That love wasn't about control. It wasn't about power. It was about trusting someone enough to let go, about surrendering to the one person who made you feel whole, flaws and all. Late one evening, Sophie found herself in his study. The same room where it had all begun. The place where carefully negotiated terms had started to shift into something far more complicated. Something real. Daniel was there as always, hunched over his desk, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm shadows on his tired face. She could see the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. But something was different now. He wasn't fighting her presence. He was welcoming it. Daniel, she called softly, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up from his work, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time in a long while, his gaze wasn't guarded. It was tender. Sophie, he murmured, his voice steady but quiet. I didn't hear you come in. I didn't want to disturb you, she said, stepping inside. You've been working non-stop lately. Daniel exhaled, pushing the papers aside. It's what I know how to do, he admitted, regret lacing his tone. I'd bury myself in work, so I don't have to deal with everything else. Sophie took a slow step closer, her heart aching for him. And what is everything else? For a moment he hesitated. His eyes flickered with doubt. Then, finally, he exhaled. Everything I've been afraid of, he admitted. The fear that if I allow myself to care too much, to feel too much, I'll lose everything. A pause, his voice dropped lower. Including you. Sophie's breath caught. In that moment she understood. For so long, Daniel had believed that control was the only way to protect himself, to protect his empire, to protect the one thing that had kept him anchored in the world he had built. But in doing so, he had almost lost the most important thing of all, his chance at something real. Daniel, Sophie said softly, her voice full of understanding. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to hide from me. Her voice was steady as she took another step closer. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Then, slowly Daniel stood. His movements were deliberate, as if he were choosing this moment, choosing her. His eyes never left hers as he crossed the room, as though searching for something he had been too afraid to face. And when he finally reached her, he took her hands in his. His touch was warm, steady, real. And Sophie knew, whatever happened next, neither of them would face it alone. Sophie. Daniel's voice was unsteady, rough with emotion. I'm scared. His fingers tightened around hers. I'm scared that if I let go, I'll lose everything. He swallowed hard, his jaw tense as if fighting against the words. But I can't keep living like this. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I can't keep pretending that I don't feel something for you. A pause. I can't keep pretending that I don't want to be with you." Sophie's breath hitched. For a moment she was speechless. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment he finally let go of his fears, the past that had held him captive for so long. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, you don't have to be afraid anymore." She reached up, cupping his face gently. "We can face this together." Her voice was steady, certain. "I believe in you." A pause. "And I believe in us." Daniel let out a breath. One he had been holding for what felt like a lifetime. Then, with a resolve that hadn't been there before, he closed the distance between them. His hands found her face, his touch warm, steady, and then he kissed her. At first it was soft, tentative, as though both of them were testing the waters of this new reality. But then the kiss deepened. The walls between them crumbled, piece by piece. All the unspoken fears, all the doubts, all the past hurts, they faded. And in their place, there was only this, the warmth of his lips against hers, the way his hands held her like she was something precious, something real. When they finally pulled away, Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven. His hands still held hers tightly, as if afraid to let go. "I'm not perfect, Sophie," he murmured. "But I want to try." A pause. "I want to be with you." His thumb brushed gently over her knuckles. "Not because it's what I need." His voice dropped lower. "But because it's what we need." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, her heart full. "You don't have to be perfect, Daniel." She smiled softly, cupping his cheek. "Just be with me." A beat of silence. "And I'll be with you." In that moment, everything fell into place. No more fear, no more hesitation. They had both let go of the walls that had kept them apart. Together they were stronger than they had ever been alone. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the future no longer seemed uncertain. Daniel's empire would still be there. But it would no longer be the only thing holding him together. Because the woman beside him, the woman who had never asked him to be anything other than himself, would be his partner, his equal. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Montoya believed that maybe, just maybe, they could build something even greater together. Months passed. Since the night Daniel had finally let go of his fears, since the night he had allowed himself to embrace love. It hadn't happened all at once. But slowly, steadily. The walls around his heart had unraveled, piece by piece, and in their place, something far more precious had taken root. Trust, vulnerability, and a kind of love he had never imagined himself worthy of. Sophie had been there every step of the way, steady, unwavering, like the calm in his storm. And with each passing day she saw more of him. Not just the powerful businessman, not just the man the world revered, but the man shaped by his past. A man who had once feared love but was now learning to hold it. And she loved him, not despite his flaws, but because of them. Because love was never about perfection. It was about choosing each other. Again and again and again. With that love came change. Daniel had finally learned to let go, to delegate the pressures of his empire to a trusted team, to stop carrying everything on his own. And for the first time, he had allowed himself to breathe, to live, to love. One bright morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of their penthouse. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, a warm cup of coffee in hand, staring out at the city below. The view was breathtaking, but it was nothing. Nothing compared to the life she had built with Daniel. A life she had never imagined would be hers. And yet, here she was, and she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Sophie had once wondered what the future would hold. She had questioned whether this life, this marriage, could ever be more than an arrangement. But as the days passed, her doubts faded, because what they had now wasn't just built on wealth or power. It was built on moments, shared laughter, quiet mornings, a love that grew stronger with every passing day. Together they were building something far more meaningful than any empire, a future filled with possibilities. Daniel walked into the kitchen, a rare, easy smile tugging at the corners of his lips. For once, he wasn't in his usual tailored suit. For once, there was no tension in his shoulders, no stress in his eyes. He looked at peace. "Morning," he murmured, leaning in to kiss her cheek before pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sophie smiled. "Morning. You're up early." He sat down across from her, his gaze warm. "I've learned that sometimes," he said, "the most important moments in life are the ones where you just stop and appreciate what you have. A pause. And right now, I'm appreciating this moment with you. Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest. There had been a time when she had thought they would never reach this point, when Daniel had been too lost in his fears, too consumed by his empire to see her. But now, everything was different. They had created something new, something real. Daniel's eyes softened as he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice steady but laced with something rare, excitement. Sophie tilted her head, intrigued. "Oh? I want us to go to Paris." Her breath caught. "Just the two of us," he continued. "No business, no distractions, a full week, just to be together, to experience something outside of this life." The invitation was simple, yet it carried so much weight. Because this wasn't just a trip, it was a promise. A chance to leave behind the expectations of the world and focus solely on each other. Sophie's heart fluttered. "Paris," she whispered, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "I'd love that." "Then it's settled," Daniel said, his own smile deepening. "We deserve this, Sophie." A pause. "And we deserve more moments like this, moments that aren't tainted by fear or doubt." He stood, offering her his hand. "Shall we go pack?" Sophie laughed, standing to join him. But before she took his hand, she paused. She turned to the window, gazing out at the city below, and for a moment she let herself take it all in. Her heart was full. Life had come full circle. Everything that had once felt uncertain now felt solid. Because what they had built wasn't based on obligation or circumstance. It was built on trust, on love, on a shared commitment to one another. The future was no longer something to fear. Together, they would face whatever came their way, knowing that love was the strongest force of all. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell us what you loved about the story, what moments stood out to you, and how we can make it even better next time. Drop a comment below. We can't wait to hear from you.